3 young soldiers told her to move her van. She said no quietly. Then a 4-star general stepped out, saw the tattoo, and saluted. That moment changed everything. If stories of quiet courage and lasting honor speak to you, subscribe to Grace Stories. The late summer air lay heavy over the pine-lined road just outside Fort Liberty, North Carolina. A battered silver van coughed once, then rolled to a gentle stop on the gravel shoulder, steam whispering out from under the hood. Claire Redford stepped out without a word. No panic, no fluster. She just grabbed the faded rag from the dash and wiped the sweat off her brow. The sun beat down hard, but she didn't flinch. Her movements were calm, automatic-like, a woman who'd fixed machines in worse heat, under worse pressure. She wore a sun-bleached tank top and old cargo pants, both streaked with grease. Her boots had long since lost their shine. Her short, grey-flecked hair was tucked under a cap. There was nothing about her that stood out until you looked closer. The gravel crunched under her as she circled to the front of the van and popped the hood. A hiss escaped from somewhere deep in the radiator. She muttered, "Leaking hose again." Claire grabbed her tool roll from behind the driver's seat. No roadside assistance, no phone calls. She didn't even look around. Just slid beneath the van and went to work, one knee grinding into the gravel, her arms disappearing into the warm guts of the engine. That's when they pulled up. A tan Humvee, base markings, moving too fast for an empty stretch of road. 3 soldiers got out in a hurry. Young, fresh uniforms, crisp caps, polished boots. One had a clipboard. One wore aviators too large for his narrow face. The third stood back, jaw set too tight like someone practicing authority. "The clipboard," one called out first. "Ma'am, this is restricted military property. Step away from the vehicle." Claire kept working, her voice even. "Just fixing a hose. I'll be gone in 10. "That's not your choice," said the one with the tight jaw. "This area is under base perimeter control. Call a tono." Claire didn't respond. She twisted her wrench, then finally slid out from under the van, slow and steady. Grease marked her arms and hands. Her face was lined, not with age, but with time. "I didn't park," she said, brushing dirt from her leg. "I broke down." "We can't allow this," the clipboard soldier insisted. "You're too close to the wire." Claire shrugged. "Fence lines behind me. Gravel's public. Last I checked, fixing your own van isn't a federal offense." The third soldier stepped forward, reaching for the radio. "We'll call security." Claire folded her arms and stood her ground. She wasn't trying to provoke them. She just wasn't going to be rushed. Then his eyes landed on her shoulder. He blinked. "Wait, is that real?" The others looked. There, half visible beneath the strap of her tank top, was a tattoo, a skull inside a weathered silver shield. Wings stretched wide, rifles crossed beneath. None of them spoke. Then the sound of tires again, heavier, slower. A black SUV rolled to a stop beside the Humvee. Military plates, tinted windows. The back door opened. Out stepped a tall man with steel-gray hair and stars on his collar, General Alan Granger. He scanned the scene. His eyes found Claire, found the tattoo, and then, without a word, he saluted. Sharp, full, silent. The sun was higher now, turning the gravel under Claire's back into something sharp and dry. She reached deeper into the engine, one hand braced against the frame, the other tightening a stubborn clamp near the radiator. The wrench slipped once, scraped metal, then clicked into place. "Stubborn old girl," Claire muttered. "You're not dying here." Her voice was low, calm. Her focus never left the task. As she shifted her weight, the strap of her tank top slid slightly off her shoulder, revealing a piece of ink that had seen more years than the men standing nearby. The youngest soldier, maybe 20, stepped forward. He had been half listening to orders, fingers near his radio, but now his eyes locked on her arm. "Ma'am," he began again, voice softer. "You need to wait. Is that real?" Claire heard the change in his tone. She didn't rush, just slid out slowly from under the van, dust clinging to her back, Grease smeared down her arms. She dropped the wrench beside her boot with a heavy clang, then stood upright and adjusted her cap. Her breathing was even, her expression unreadable. The soldier stared. The others followed his gaze. The tattoo. A black skull inside a silver shield. Twin rifles crossed beneath. Wings spread wide, almost feathered into fire. The ink was faded with time, but not forgotten. One of the soldiers whispered, "That's Ghost Company." The second frowned. "I thought that was a myth." Claire didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any answer. The air changed. Nobody moved. These young men had trained for checklists, procedures, rules of engagement, but they hadn't trained for this. For the quiet weight of history standing in front of them, wearing sweat and dust like armor. Then came the tires. Soft, deliberate. A black SUV rolled to a stop behind the Humvee. No sirens, no lights, just the quiet presence of authority. The rear door opened. A tall man stepped out, dark slacks, starched shirt, 4 stars glinting under the sunlight. No aids, no clipboard, just memory written in the lines of his face. General Alan Granger. He scanned the scene with the discipline of habit. Vehicle, soldiers, perimeter, civilian. But when his eyes landed on Claire Redford, the tattoo stopped moving. His jaw locked tight. His gaze held. And then, without saying a word, he raised his right hand. A full salute. Sharp, measured, steady. The soldiers froze. Their posture shifted, unsure whether to copy him or simply stand back. None of them had ever seen a general salute first. Claire didn't return it, not right away. She looked at him, really looked. And something in her gaze shifted, not surprise, not pride, just the faint acknowledgement of a past long buried. She nodded, just once. She had been saluted before over bodies, through smoke, on extraction flights that never made the news. But this one was different. It wasn't about command. It wasn't about rank. It was about something only the few ever understood. Memory. For what was done when no one was looking. For the weight carried long after the mission ended. For the promise that still hadn't been broken. General Marcus Hayward held the salute for a few seconds longer than protocol required. When he finally lowered his hand, the silence hung thick between them. No one moved. The 3 young soldiers stood frozen beside the Humvee, eyes darting between Helen and the man with stars on his collar. The general took a few measured steps forward, stopping just short of the open hood. His voice was steady, but something behind it had changed, like a memory walking back into the room. "Helen Monroe," he said. She gave a slight nod, guarded. "Used to be." "You were at Firebase Kestrel," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her face. 2010. Her arms were crossed, stained with grease and time. But her eyes didn't waver. "That was a long time ago." "You pulled 2 of my men out," he said, "when the barracks collapsed after the Ridge strike." There it was. Not a question. A fact. Helen didn't blink. "You were Bravo Group, running mountain recon." He nodded slowly. "We were pinned by mortar fire. They'd buried explosives in the rocks above the compound. Half the valley came down on top of us." Helen looked past him for a moment, as if seeing it again, the dust cloud, the screams, the sound of wood and stone breaking apart like brittle bones. "One of your sergeants had a broken leg," she said. "The other was unconscious. I dragged them both out through the mess tent." "You didn't wait for backup," Hayward said. "You didn't even have air cover." She shook her head. "Didn't have time." He exhaled through his nose just once and glanced down. "I didn't know your name back then," he said. "Most didn't," Helen replied. That was the point. The young soldiers behind them stood completely still now. They weren't part of the conversation, not really. But they understood enough to stay quiet. The general turned to them. "She's not to be bothered," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She's to be assisted. Get Motorpool out here now." One soldier fumbled with the radio and nearly dropped it. The others just stared at Helen, like they were seeing her for the first time. Hayward turned back to her. I heard stories, he said, after Kestrel, about Ghost Company 7, operations nobody could confirm, Dustgate, Firehook, Jalris. Helen's jaw flexed slightly at the last name. He caught the shift. You were there too. We lost 3, she said quietly. One of them was my best friend. Hayward didn't ask who. He simply nodded. They stood in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence shared only between those who had heard the same sounds. The screams, the shrapnel, the silence afterward. Finally, Helen spoke. We didn't do it for the medals, she said. We did it for the person next to us. Hayward looked her in the eye. And some of us are alive because of it. She didn't respond. Not with words, but her shoulders eased just slightly, as if some unseen weight had shifted. Behind them, the base loomed just beyond the trees, its fences, its barracks, its routines. But this moment didn't belong to the institution. It belonged to 2 people who had been through something no award could fully name. Hayward took one last look at the van. Looks like it's holding together. For now. Helen glanced at the engine. She's stubborn. Like her driver. Helen gave the faintest half smile. It came and went so fast, you might have missed it. But the general didn't. Would you stay a little while? He asked. We've got a lot of young soldiers on this base. They hear stories, but they rarely meet the ones who lived them. Helen looked toward the base, then back at him. No speeches. No speeches, he promised. Just soldiers listening. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no. While they waited for Motorpool to arrive, Claire leaned against the side of the van. The warmth of the metal pressed into her back, mixing with the sun still high above the pines. She looked across the road, but her eyes weren't on the scenery. They were on the past. General Granger stood a few feet away, hands behind his back, silent. He understood not to fill the space. Some memories speak best in quiet. Claire reached into the van through the open driver-side door and gently pulled something from the dash. A photo. Faded, its corners curled from heat and years of glove-box wear. 2 young women stood in dusty combat gear, helmets slung at their sides, their grins broad and defiant. One was Claire, decades younger, eyes sharper, face streaked with sweat and soot. The other, Samantha. Sam Reyes-Horter, darker hair tucked behind her ears, the kind of smile that stuck with you even in silence. Claire held it up, not to show off, but to remember clearly. She was my best friend, Claire said. Sam. Samantha Reyes. Granger nodded with quiet recognition. I remember the name. I think I read it in a debrief once. She didn't come back, Claire said softly. Jalris Valley. The general didn't speak. He waited. Claire took a slow breath and tucked the photo back against the dash, gently pressing it into the clip where she always kept it beside the old compass and a folded cloth map. She made me promise cross every state, see what we were fighting for. Granger's gaze dropped to the interior of the van, then back to her face. He didn't ask the obvious question. Claire answered anyway. I wasn't ready then, she said, but I am now. She folded her arms and leaned her head back against the metal, eyes blinking against the sunlight. Right before the last mission, she said, we were pinned behind a dry creek bed. No comms, no air support. They had us boxed in. Sam was patching up a kid who took shrapnel to the chest. I was on perimeter. She knew, Claire added. She knew the odds. What'd she say? Granger asked quietly. She said, if I don't make it, don't you sit around drinking boxed wine and watching reruns. Claire gave the ghost of a smile. You get in that busted-up van and drive, every state, every town, see it for both of us. Granger nodded once, a sharp, contained motion. That's a hell of a promise. Claire looked at him. It took me years to touch the keys again. Too many reasons not to, but the picture, it just kept staring back. Granger looked inside the van again at the old upholstery, the sun-faded dashboard, the compass, the rusted bolts that kept holding everything together. You're doing it, he said. Claire nodded. 31 states to go. A short silence followed, filled only by the wind moving through the pine branches overhead. It smelled faintly of jet fuel and warm dust. Then a pickup truck rolled into view, painted tan with faded base markings. Two men climbed out, older than the three from earlier, sleeves rolled up, faces already lined with oil and time. They didn't ask questions, just nodded to Claire, popped the hood, and got to work. "Better crew than I ever had in Kandahar," Claire muttered. Granger let out a short laugh. "We still keep the good ones in Motorpool." As the mechanics worked, one of the younger soldiers approached timidly, clipboard in hand, eyes darting between Claire and Granger. "Ma'am," he said, "I didn't know about any of it." Claire looked at him, not with judgment, but something else. "You weren't supposed to," she said. And that was all. The repairs didn't take long. A hose clamp, a few bolts, and a new belt from the back of the Motorpool truck. The van coughed, then purred like it had found just enough reason to keep going. Claire Redford stood nearby, arms crossed, watching in silence. She didn't hover. She just let the mechanics do their work. She respected people who knew what they were doing. General Alan Granger stood beside her. They hadn't spoken much since the promise was named out loud. Finally, as one of the mechanics closed the hood and gave her a small nod, Granger turned to her. "You still planning to roll out today?" he asked. Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked at the base gate ahead. She could hear cadence drills in the distance boots striking pavement in unison. A new generation repeating the rhythm of the last. "I don't sleep well on base anymore," she said flatly. "Too many memories, too many ghosts." "I understand," Granger replied. He didn't try to convince her otherwise. But then he said, "Would you consider staying a little longer, just the afternoon?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "We have a room, quiet, just folding chairs and fans that barely work. No flags, no speeches." Claire narrowed her gaze. "What do you want from me?" Granger didn't hesitate. "A story. The truth. From someone who's earned the right to tell it." He let the silence breathe for a moment before continuing. "You'd be surprised how many of them think service started with them. And how many of them don't realize they're walking in the bootprints of people like you." Claire shook her head slowly. "I'm not some banner to wave around." "I know," Granger said, "and that's why I'm asking." She studied him for a long moment. The general wasn't trying to flatter her. He wasn't trying to recruit her for a PR reel or a highlight ceremony. He meant it. Finally, she asked, "Who would be there?" "Whoever wants to listen," he said. "Nothing official. Word's already spreading. 3 kids from Perimeter Detail are probably talking about it right now. We're not forcing anyone." "No cameras?" He shook his head. "Not even a microphone unless you want one." Claire looked back toward the van, then toward the base again. "You sure about this?" Granger nodded. "No ceremony, just soldiers, listening." She let out a long breath. "I don't like standing behind podiums." "You can stand in the doorway if you want." Claire gave the faintest trace of a grin. "All right," she said. "But if anyone claps, I walk." "No one will," Granger said. "Not unless you tell them to." The briefing room wasn't much. A dozen rows of metal folding chairs, walls the color of paper left too long in the sun, and a ceiling fan that hummed more than it moved air. Claire Redford stood near the back, her arms crossed. She wasn't sure why she agreed to this. She hated being looked at. She hated remembering, too, but she hated forgetting more. Slowly, the chairs filled in. Some wore crisp uniforms. Some wore fatigue-stained shirts from morning drills. Most were young. A few older non-coms stood along the back wall, arms folded, silent. There was no stage, just a podium pushed to the front, like it had been dragged there reluctantly. General Granger stepped forward first. "We talk a lot in this room," he said, "about tactics, structure, readiness. But today, you'll hear something else. Not from a book, from someone who lived it." He turned to Claire. "She won't say it, but she's the reason some of us are still breathing. She served in a unit most people don't know ever existed. Ghost Company 7, Jalres Valley, Firehook, Dustgate. things buried deeper than records go. A quiet murmur ran through the room. Claire didn't walk to the podium. She simply moved to its side and rested one hand lightly on its edge. Her sleeves were rolled. Grease still stained the cuff of her shirt. "You want the story?" she asked, voice even. "All right. But I'm not telling it for applause." She pulled the strap of her tank top aside just slightly. The tattoo glinted in the fluorescent light. "I'm telling it so you understand what this patch means." The room was silent. "We were dropped into the ridge east of Jalris in 6, she began. 7 of us. No air support, no backup, just orders." She didn't embellish. Her voice was calm, her cadence steady. Taliban had the valley locked tight. Mines, snipers, spotters with radios. We lost our first man in the first hour. Ramirez stepped on a pressure plate going around a bend. She paused, not dramatically, but because it deserved a breath. "Sam patched me up after shrapnel hit my leg. She always carried more than regulation. Said the people who wrote the packing lists never got shot at." A few quiet laughs, but no smiles. "We made it to the valley floor by nightfall. That's when the signal flared. Red. We knew it wasn't ours. It was bait." Claire looked up. "You ever hear 30 rifles fire at once in the dark? It doesn't sound like gunfire. It sounds like thunder cracking open your chest." No one moved. We were pinned. 3 sides. No cover worth a damn. There was a medevac bird down just south of the ridge. Still had people alive. No one else was coming. So we moved. She glanced toward the wall. Not to avoid their eyes, but to steady her own. "We laid suppressive fire. Sam took point. We pulled 3 survivors out. I dragged one airman, maybe 1950 yards uphill, while Sam kept the path clear behind me. She wasn't supposed to be on comms, but she kept talking to me the whole time." Claire's voice thinned, but didn't break. She said, "Don't think. Just crawl." A beat of silence. There was only 1 seat left on the rope evac. I got the last survivor clipped in, told Sam to grab on behind me. Claire's jaw clenched. She shook her head. Said, "You owe me a road trip, Redford. Don't waste it." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. I grabbed the cable. She stayed. Fired until we were out of range. Behind her, General Granger dimmed the lights and projected a grainy satellite image on the wall. Jalres Valley. You could almost feel the dust. Claire didn't look at it. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't go to any ceremonies. They classified the mission before the chopper even landed. One of the young soldiers near the front raised a hand, hesitant. "Ma'am, why haven't we ever heard this before?" Claire looked at him, not unkindly. "Because the mission was buried. Because people like Sam didn't get medals. They got buried." Another voice, softer. "Why didn't you ever speak up? Get recognition?" Claire looked down at her boots, then up again. "We didn't do it for that. We did it for the person standing next to us." The room was still. Some had their hands clasped behind their backs. Others sat leaning forward, elbows on knees. Granger stepped beside her, voice quiet. "I can still hear her on comms. I didn't know her name until today, now I do." Claire nodded. She would have liked that. No one clapped. No one made a sound. They didn't need to. Granger clapped his hands once firm, not loud. "I want every soldier here to remember today," he said. "Because what you heard isn't written down. But it's real. And it's yours now." He turned to Claire. "And if she'll allow it, I'd like her to come back. To train with us. To remind us what courage actually looks like." Claire didn't answer. But the look in her eyes said she wasn't saying no. The lights in the room stayed dim after Claire Redford finished speaking. No one moved. No one stirred. The satellite image of Jalres Valley still hovered on the wall behind her, grainy and cold. Claire stepped back from the podium, or rather, from the edge of it. She hadn't once taken center stage. Her voice hadn't risen. She hadn't asked for silence. But she had earned it. A young corporal near the 3rd row looked down, hands locked tight on his knees. One of the older sergeants at the back stood a little straighter, his jaw clenched. And still, no one spoke. Claire didn't flinch under their gaze. She had told the truth, and that was enough. She turned to Gounod dramatically, just naturally, like a person who had said what she came to say and had nothing left to add. Then it happened. It started with the corporal. He stood. No command, no prompt. He just rose quietly from his chair and brought his hand to his brow. A salute. Not the kind you give because you're told to. The kind you give because you know what someone gave up, so you could still be standing. The others followed, one by one. No noise, no ceremony, just the scrape of boots against the floor and the slow, deliberate rise of dozens of hands to their foreheads. Every soldier in the room stood. No one clapped. No one even breathed too loudly. Claire turned back, just slightly. Her eyes moved over the room. And then she did something none of them expected. She didn't return the salute. She brought her right hand up not to her forehead, but to her chest. Palm over heart. The gesture was simple, unmistakable. This wasn't about protocol. It was about something more permanent than uniform or rank. It was about memory. About loss. About the weight of a promise carried for years by someone who never asked to be seen. From the back, General Alan Granger stood with his arms crossed, a slow breath leaving his lungs. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The soldiers held their salutes, some with tears quietly building in the corners of their eyes, others with expressions of dawning respect. Finally, Claire lowered her hand. Her face was calm, but something behind her eyes had shifted. They weren't looking at a story anymore. They were looking at someone who never stopped serving, even when no one was watching. She looked toward Granger. "We didn't ask for recognition," she said quietly. "We just didn't stop." He nodded once, solemn. "I know." The lights came back on slowly, but no one moved until Claire took a step toward the door. Only then did they start to lower their salute slowly, almost reluctantly. Some nodded at her as she passed. Others didn't move, unsure of what to say or if anything needed to be said at all. Outside the hallway, the hum of bass life returned. Voices, footsteps, distant movement. The world had resumed its routine. But the room behind her had changed. Something had shifted there. Something had settled. Granger met her near the exit. "You changed something in there," he said. Claire gave a soft exhale. "They changed something in me, too." For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then Granger asked, "Do you still have the photo?" Claire reached into the van's side compartment and pulled it out. The same faded image at young women in dusty combat gear, standing with arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning like they had time. "She gave me the rest of my life," Claire said, barely above a whisper. "I'm spending it trying to understand what that means." Granger nodded. "And you're doing it. One state at a time." The next morning, the base felt different. It wasn't the buildings or the layout. The gravel still crunched the same under boots, and the flag still flapped over the parade field. But something had shifted. You could feel it in how the young soldiers walked past Claire Redfordson, nodding quietly, some just standing a little taller. Her van sat in the Motorpool lot, hood down, looking lighter, not younger, just more willing. The belts had been replaced, fluids topped off. Even the dent near the rear wheel, well, the one she hadn't noticed in years, had been gently hammered out. Claire opened the driver's door and found an envelope on the seat. Inside, a folded base map with fuel stops circled, scenic routes highlighted in red pen, and a note written in tight, careful handwriting. "You're not alone on this road. Fort Liberty, Motorpool." Claire let out a quiet breath through her nose, almost a laugh. "You boys and your logistics." She tucked the note behind the visor and sat down slowly. The seat creaked the same way it always had. The dashboard still held the compass, the cloth map and the photo. The photo never moved. Sam's smile, frozen in dust and memory, still looked out the windshield like she always had a destination in mind. Claire tapped the corner of the picture with 2 fingers. "Still with me?" No one answered. But she didn't expect one. She poured the rest of her base-issued coffee into the tin thermos, no sugar, just the way Sam used to drink it. The mess hall worker, an older woman named Mara, had handed it to her with a wink and said nothing else. That was fine. Claire liked people who didn't need to fill silence. As she eased the van through the outer checkpoint, a young soldier stood post at the gate. His helmet was slightly tilted, his face pink from morning drills. He raised his hand not in the standard salute, but in a gesture she hadn't seen in years. 2 fingers to the temple, then pressed gently over the heart. Ghost Company. Claire's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. She returned the gesture slowly, firmly, and the gate swung open. The road ahead was open and long. The morning sun hadn't yet burned the mist off the highway, and the pine trees cast long shadows across the 2-lane stretch. She passed the sign. Knoxville, 112 miles. Sam had always talked about Knoxville. Said she wanted to see the Smokies in fall. Said it was the kind of place where freedom didn't need permission. Claire didn't know what she'd find there. Maybe nothing. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't a mission. It was a promise. One she had carried too long in silence. One she was finally learning how to keep with every mile, every face, every quiet handshake that said, "We remember, even if we didn't know your name." As she drove, the wind pushed through the open window, tossing the map slightly on the passenger seat. Claire reached out and pinned it under the photo with one steady hand. There were still 30 states to go. Still back roads to find. Still strangers to meet. Still ghosts to carry. But today, there was Knoxville. And that was enough. She glanced at the photo again. Sam's face caught the morning light just right. Claire smiled not wide, not for show, but the kind that came from deep, stubborn survival. "I'm still going, Ra," she whispered. "I'm going to see it all for both of us." And with that, she pressed the gas. The van rolled forward, leaving Fort Liberty behind. But not the mission. Not the memory. Not the promise. Some stories don't need medals or monuments. They need to be remembered quietly, honestly. Claire Redford never asked for recognition. She carried her promise through decades, 1 mile at a time, because a friend once told her, "See what we were fighting for." And maybe that's something we all carry: promises we made, moments we survived, and people we miss. This story reminds us that honoring the past doesn't always mean grand gestures. Sometimes it means fixing your van, keeping your word, and showing up for someone who can't anymore. Wherever you are in life, on the road, looking back, or starting again, know this: your story matters. Your quiet strength leaves a mark. If you believe stories like Claire's deserve to be told, we invite you to subscribe to Grace Stories. Here, silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care of your memories and each other. God bless, and safe travels.